In the high-octane arms race of the 1960s and early 70s, Ford was no bystander. While GM and Chrysler threw big blocks and bold stripes at every showroom, Ford brought its own weapons to the fight, and they were ruthless. From screaming Cobra Jets to street-legal race cars. But like a magician vanishing an elephant, Ford made these beasts disappear. Sometimes quietly, sometimes overnight. They were silenced before their time, leaving only tire smoke and rumors in their wake. Here are 10 super muscle cars Ford built and then erased.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 10, the 1969 Ford Torino Tallaladega 428 Cobra Jet, covering its NASCAR origins, performance, rarity, and legacy. In the late 1960s, NASCAR racing was more than just sport. It was a battleground of aerodynamics and horsepower. The mantra, "Win on Sunday, sell on Monday," drove manufacturers to pour resources into race-specific designs that flirted with the edge of legality. To compete with Dodge's slippery Charger 500 and soon-to-arrive Daytona, Ford developed the 1969 Torino Tallaladega, a street car built solely to qualify a track car for NASCAR. It featured a specially shaped front end for maximum aerodynamic advantage and housed the ferocious 428 Cobra Jet engine. This wasn't a muscle car for your average buyer. It was a homologation special, built in limited numbers and sold just enough to meet NASCAR's rules. Once it served its purpose, Ford walked away. The Torino Tallaladega was never intended to be a high-volume muscle car or a showroom darling. It was engineered from the beginning for one thing: to win in NASCAR's superspeedway battles. Key aerodynamic features included a redesigned, sloped front nose that was 5 inches longer than the standard Torino, a flush-mounted grille and recessed headlights, a reshaped rocker panel that allowed the car to sit lower to the ground without violating NASCAR ride height rules, a smooth, seamless front bumper fabricated from a modified rear bumper, designed to slice through air. These tweaks weren't aesthetic. They were tested in the wind tunnel and built for speed. Under the hood of the street version was Ford's legendary 428 cubic inch Cobra Jet V8, rated at 335 horsepower, but real-world output was much closer to 400 horsepower, delivered massive torque, 440-plus pound-feet, ideal for big track acceleration. Paired with a C6 heavy-duty automatic transmission, backed by performance rear gearing, traction bars, and heavy-duty cooling systems. This engine had already proven itself in drag racing and street performance. In the Tallaladega, it powered a body designed to dominate the ovals. To qualify the Tallaladega for NASCAR competition, Ford had to produce a minimum number of street-legal examples, exactly 500 according to NASCAR's 1969 rules, though Ford built slightly more, around 750 to 754 units total. All of them were painted in one of three colors: Wimbledon white, presidential blue, or royal maroon. Equipped with bench seats, column shifters, and modest interiors. Nothing fancy. Technically sold to the public, though many were routed through racing teams or special dealerships. These cars were bare-bones brutes, engineered for one thing: satisfying NASCAR's homologation checklist. On the NASCAR circuit, the Tallaladega was a success. Dominated early in the 1969 season, especially with David Pearson behind the wheel for Holman Moody Racing. Its slippery front end gave it an edge over the boxier Mopars and Chevys. Ford won 29 Grand National races in 1969, more than any other manufacturer. But the victory was short-lived. Dodge fired back with the Charger Daytona, an even more extreme aero car with a pointed nose and a massive rear wing. The aero wars were escalating rapidly. Despite its track success, the Torino Tallaladega was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Cost. The Tallaladega was expensive to build and not very profitable. Limited appeal. It wasn't luxurious or versatile. It was a one-purpose missile. Rising competition. The Daytona and Plymouth Superbird outpaced it in NASCAR, forcing Ford to reconsider its aero strategy. Rule changes. NASCAR soon clamped down on extreme aero designs, with displacement limits and homologation rule changes. Ford pulled the plug after 1969. No 1970. Talladega was ever offered, and the nameplate vanished as quickly as it had arrived. Because Ford built so few Talladegas, and many were used and abused on the track or by enthusiasts, surviving examples are extremely rare today. Only around 750 were built. Fewer than 600 are believed to still exist, many in the hands of collectors. Their aero uniqueness and NASCAR heritage make them highly sought after among enthusiasts of homologation specials. It's one of those cars that disappeared before most people even knew it existed, which makes it even more fascinating. The 1969 Ford Torino Tallaladega 428 Cobra Jet wasn't designed to be a daily driver or a boulevard cruiser. It was a blunt instrument in a very specific war, the NASCAR Aero Battle of 1969. It did its job and did it well, winning races and shaking up the competition. But like a Special Forces operative, it wasn't meant to stick around. After the mission was accomplished, the Talladega was quietly retired. Today it stands as one of the purest expressions of purpose-built performance, a moment in muscle car history when design, engineering, and competition aligned to create a short-lived but unforgettable machine. Number 9, the 1971 Ford Mustang Boss 351. One of the most overlooked but technically brilliant muscle cars of the early 70s. In 1971, as the muscle car era teetered on the edge of extinction, Ford introduced one of the most formidable Mustangs it had ever built, the Boss 351. This was not a half-hearted swan song. It was a serious performance machine with top-tier handling, high revving power, and a racing pedigree baked into its DNA. But unfortunately, it arrived in the worst possible year. Emissions regulations were tightening, insurance companies were cracking down on high-performance cars, and public appetite for brash, fast machines was starting to cool. The Boss 351, despite its brilliance, was a victim of bad timing, and it disappeared after just one model year. The 1971 Mustang was a departure from the lean, sporty design of the late 60s models. Ford upsized the platform, giving the car a longer, wider body, a more aggressive stance, sharper, more angular styling. The redesign was meant to accommodate big block engines, meet new safety standards, and appeal to changing customer tastes. But the larger dimensions meant added weight, a challenge for performance models like the Boss 351. Despite this, the Boss 351 overcame the bulk with one of the best handling and fastest packages Ford ever built. The heart of the Boss 351 was a 351 cubic inch Cleveland 5.8, specifically the R code, Boss 351 engine. Produced a factory-rated 330 horsepower, but real output was likely closer to 375 plus horsepower. Featured solid lifters, a high-lift mechanical cam, and 4-bolt mains. Came with 11:1 compression, an aluminum intake manifold, and a 750 CFM Autolite carburetor. Revved freely and aggressively, much like a small block race engine. This wasn't a detuned big block or a casual cruiser motor. It was an engine built for high RPM, road course style performance, and it loved to scream. While the Boss 302 of previous years was famous for its Trans Am success and nimbleness, the Boss 351 was both quicker and more refined on the street, 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 5.7 seconds quarter-mile times, in the 14-second range, often under 14.1 at 100 plus miles per hour. Superior mid-range torque and acceleration compared to the 302. Handling upgrades included stiffer springs, a rear sway bar, competition suspension, and wide F60-15 tires on Magnum 500 wheels. It was one of the best balanced muscle cars Ford ever made, offering not just straight-line speed, but also real handling competence, something many muscle cars of the 1960s time lacked. Visually, the Boss 351 stood out with flat black hood treatment with optional hood locks and scoops. Boss 351, decals on the fenders and rear panel. A choice of fastback, sports roof, body only, no convertible or coupe options. Available in striking high-impact colors like grabber blue, grabber lime, and bright red. The styling was pure 70s muscle, bold, aggressive, and unmistakable. Despite its strengths, the Boss 351 never got a second chance. Only 1,806 units were built, and here's why it disappeared. Insurance premiums for muscle cars skyrocketed in 1971. Buyers were scared away by high ownership costs. Emissions regulations began to choke high-compression engines. The Boss 351's 11.0-to-1 compression ratio wouldn't survive into 1972. Gas prices and insurance concerns shifted buyer interest towards smaller, more efficient cars. Ford canceled all Boss Mustangs after 1971, including a rumored Boss 351 for 1972 that would have been severely detuned. The result? The Boss 351 became one of the rarest and most underappreciated Mustangs ever built. Today, the Boss 351 is gaining long overdue respect. Considered the best all-around performance Mustang of the first generation. Its low production numbers make it highly collectible. Unlike the more famous Boss 302 and Boss 429, the Boss 351 remained underrated for decades, which kept prices relatively reasonable. Collectors now recognize that it offered a perfect blend of muscle car brawn and sports car finesse, with none of the compromises that plagued later 70s Mustangs. Number 8, the 1968 Mercury Cougar GTE 428 Cobra Jet, a luxurious but muscular pony car that couldn't quite find its place in the rapidly evolving late 60s performance market. When people think of late 60s pony cars, the Ford Mustang usually steals the spotlight. But there was another more refined sibling sitting quietly in Ford's showroom, the Mercury Cougar. Introduced in 1967, the Cougar was marketed as a more mature, upscale version of the Mustang. Not a raw muscle car, but a gentleman's fastback. But for a brief moment in 1968, Mercury decided to unleash something truly brutal. The Cougar GTE, equipped first with a 427 big block, and then upgraded mid-year to the 428 Cobra Jet. It was one of the most powerful and fastest Cougars ever made, and yet it was gone almost as soon as it arrived. This is the story of a luxury performance coupe that never quite found a loyal audience. A car caught between two worlds and crushed by its own contradictions. When the Cougar debuted in 1967, it was positioned as a longer, sleeker, and quieter Mustang, aimed at buyers who wanted sophistication with their speed, offering premium features like hidden headlights, sequential taillights, and plush interiors. Mercury didn't want to compete directly with the Mustang or the Camaro. It wanted the Cougar to be the European-inspired American pony car, something to woo buyers who might otherwise go for a Jaguar or a Riviera. But performance was becoming the name of the game. As competitors ramped up their horsepower wars, Mercury realized it couldn't sit on the sidelines. Enter the GTE. The GTE was Mercury's top dog performance trim for the Cougar in 1968. It featured a high-performance engine as standard, initially the 427 V8, then later the 428 Cobra Jet, special badging and GTE exclusive exterior trim, beefier suspension and handling components, a more aggressive personality under all the luxury. Only 357 GTEs were built with the 427 and just 37 with the 428 Cobra Jet, making the CJ-powered GTE one of the rarest production Cougars ever. Midway through 1968, the legendary 428 Cobra Jet replaced the 427 as the engine for the GTE. The Cobra Jet was officially rated at 335 horsepower, but widely understood to produce over 400 horsepower. Stuffed with high-flow heads, a performance cam, and heavy-duty internals. Designed to dominate in drag racing and straight-line speed contests. Paired with either a C6 automatic or a 4-speed top-loader manual. In the Cougar's chassis, which was heavier and quieter than the Mustang, the CJ engine transformed the GTE into a sophisticated missile. It could run quarter-mile times in the low 14s, if not faster with slicks. Here's the heart of the GTE's problem. It was too expensive and too subtle to appeal to traditional muscle car buyers. The base price of a GTE Cougar hovered near $4,000, well above most Camaros, Mustangs, and Roadrunners. It came loaded with features, but lacked the raw, youthful appeal of its muscle car rivals. It wasn't marketed aggressively as a performance car. Mercury still leaned heavily on the luxury angle. To many buyers, it was a car that couldn't decide what it wanted to be: refined boulevard cruiser or stoplight dragster. This identity crisis meant that even though it was faster than many muscle cars of its day, very few buyers took notice, and even fewer reached for their wallets. Sales figures tell the story. Only 394 GTs were ever built, including the 37,428 Cobra Jet versions. The Cougar was quickly overshadowed by Ford's growing lineup of Mustangs and Fairlanes, which had more focused performance packages at lower prices. By 1969, Mercury had shifted its focus to the Eliminator line, a more traditionally styled muscle cougar with bolder colors and striping, better suited to the changing tastes of the performance crowd. The GTE name vanished after just one model year, never to return. Because of its rarity and powerful drivetrain, the GTE 428 Cobra Jet is highly prized among Cougar collectors, even though it's virtually unknown to the broader muscle car world. With fewer than 40 made, surviving examples are rare and valuable. They represent the pinnacle of Cougar performance, the ultimate expression of Mercury's pony car experiment. The GTE's combination of understated styling and brutal power makes it a true sleeper. It's a muscle car for those who appreciate subtlety, not stripes, spoilers, and scoops, but hidden strength under a well-tailored suit. Number 7, the 1970 Ford Falcon 429 Cobra Jet, one of the most fascinating and short-lived muscle car experiments of the era. By 1970, the Ford Falcon was a shadow of what it once had been. Originally launched in 1960 as Ford's answer to compact cars like the Chevrolet Corvair and the Rambler American, the Falcon had been a huge success during the early 60s. Affordable, practical, and conservative, it was never meant to be fast, just dependable. But a decade later, as the muscle car era reached its peak, Ford tried something strange and aggressive. They stuffed a 429 Cobra Jet big block V8 into the bare-bones Falcon body. The result was a blunt force missile of a car, light, fast, crude, and unrefined, and completely out of step with both its own nameplate's legacy and the broader market's expectations. The 1970 Ford Falcon 429 Cobra Jet was a final chaotic hurrah for the Falcon badge, a name that vanished almost immediately after this car's short-lived run. To understand the 1970 Falcon 429 CJ, we need to understand where the Falcon stood in the Ford lineup. By 1970, the Falcon was no longer a true compact. It shared the same platform as the midsize Ford Fairlane in Torino, making it a trim-level sibling rather than a distinct model. The Falcon was marketed as the cheapest, most stripped-down version of Ford's intermediate cars. That meant no frills, few options, and a price tag that screamed fleet car. The kind of vehicle you'd find in a rental lot or a utility company's garage. So what was Ford thinking when they dropped a massive 429 cubic inch V8 Cobra Jet into it? The 429 Cobra Jet was no ordinary engine. Displacement: 429 cubic inches, 7.0 liters. Rated at 370 horsepower gross, but real output was closer to 400 plus horsepower. Torque: 450 plus pound-feet. It used big port heads, high-flow exhaust, and had serious drag strip potential. This was an engine designed for cars like the Torino Cobra, Cyclone spoiler, or even the Boss 429 Mustang in a more exotic version. It was brutal, heavy, and loud, and it was the last thing you'd expect in a Falcon. And yet, for reasons that seem almost accidental, Ford allowed a handful of Falcons to be optioned with this engine, typically through fleet ordering codes or dealer connections. What was the 1970 Falcon 429 Cobra Jet like to drive? In a word, raw. With the CJ engine and a C6 automatic or 4-speed top-loader manual, it was incredibly quick in a straight line. Because the Falcon body was stripped of sound insulation and amenities, every roar and vibration was felt. It had no luxury appointments, no sport package, no flashy styling, just basic steel wheels, flat paint, and a bench seat. It was a true sleeper in the most literal sense. A car that looked like it belonged to your grandfather, but could outrun a GTO. There were no RT stripes, no Mach 1 badging, no hood scoops. Just an unmarked beast with a sledgehammer of an engine. The 1970 Falcon 429 Cobra Jet was doomed before it even hit showrooms. The Falcon name was being phased out, replaced by the Torino Fairlane-based lineup. Emissions regulations and insurance premiums were starting to gut the muscle car market. Ford made very few of these cars, and they were never widely promoted or advertised. Most were fleet orders or special requests, meaning they weren't easy to find or even configure unless you knew the right codes. It didn't help that the Falcon was utterly anonymous looking. To many buyers, it was just a cheap intermediate sedan. To muscle car fans, it lacked the swagger of a Mustang or Torino Cobra. By the end of 1970, the Falcon name was completely removed from the Ford intermediate lineup, surviving only briefly on the Canadian market. Today, the 1970 Falcon 429 CJ is a legend among muscle car enthusiasts, but also a mystery. So few were made, and so little documentation exists, that it's considered one of the true factory freaks of the era. Exact production numbers are unclear, though most sources agree it was under 100 units. Many were drag raced to death or modified into something else. Surviving examples are virtually non-existent, and those that do exist command high prices from collectors who understand what they're looking at. It's a car that embodies the strange, chaotic final stretch of the golden age of muscle, a time when power was still king, but the market was shifting fast. Number 6, the 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1428 Super Cobra Jet S CJ, a pinnacle of raw muscle power that remains one of the most ferocious Mustangs ever built, yet one that quietly disappeared as the muscle era began to wane. By 1969, the Ford Mustang was no longer the new kid on the block. What began as a pony car in 1964 had morphed into a larger, more aggressive machine. The competition had caught up, and in many cases, surpassed it. The Camaro SS, Dodge Charger RT, and Plymouth Roadrunner were offering brutal big block V8s and quarter-mile dominance. Ford responded with what would become one of the most legendary Mustangs ever, the Mach 1428 Super Cobra Jet. This was no ordinary Mustang. The SCJ wasn't just about looks or badge prestige. It was built for straight-line warfare, engineered to take on the strip and embarrass the competition. The Mach 1 name debuted in 1969 as a performance-oriented fastback Mustang variant, replacing the GT package. It brought a unique blackout hood treatment with a shaker scoop, optional, bold striping, sport wheels, and special badging. A more luxurious interior with high-back buckets and simulated wood grain. It was an instant hit with buyers, but beneath the skin, Ford offered an escalating range of powertrains. In the top of that pyramid was the 428 Super Cobra Jet with drag pack. At the heart of the beast was Ford's most fearsome street engine, 428 cubic inches, 7.0 liters, big block V8, rated at 335 horsepower, but real output was estimated around 410 to 425 horsepower. Torque 440 plus pound-feet, perfect for launching off the line. Included stronger internal components than the regular 428 CJ Lemon's spec cab, screw connecting rods, balanced rotating assembly, external engine oil cooler, key drag pack indicator, 3.91 or 4.30 rear gears with traction lock differential, required 93 plus octane fuel, and came with serious cooling support. This wasn't an engine for casual cruising. The SCJ was all business, a street-legal engine that was essentially a factory-built race motor. To get the SCJ, buyers selected the drag pack option, which quietly upgraded the standard Cobra Jet into a full-blown SCJ setup. Ford didn't even advertise it heavily, making it a bit of an insider's choice. Drag pack included 3.91 or 4.30 rear gears, external oil cooler mounted in front of the radiator. Upgraded engine internals capable of handling sustained high RPM abuse. This turned the Mach 1 into a legitimate drag strip predator, one capable of high 13s or low 14s in the quarter mile with little more than slicks and a good driver. Contemporary tests, though often done with caution due to Ford's fear of warranty claims, still showed the SCJ Mach 1 to be a rocket 0 to 60 miles per hour. 5.5 seconds. 1/4 mile, 13.9 to 14.2 seconds at 101 to 104 miles per hour. Stock trim. Top speed, Jut 130 plus miles per hour. Gear limited. These were supercar numbers in 1969, and they placed the Mach 1 SCJ in the same conversation as Hemi Mopars and 454 Chevelle. And yet, unlike the Boss 429, which was built for homologation and NASCAR credibility, the SCJ was meant for the drag strip, and it delivered. The 1969 Mach 1 looked the part. Fastback-only body style, chin spoiler, hood pins, optional rear wing, and louvers. Shaker hood scoop, functional, which vibrated violently at idle. Mach 1 graphics and racing-style touches. It was a muscle car that balanced menace with beauty, and Ford struck gold in terms of street presence. Despite its brilliance, the 428S CJ Mach 1 was quietly phased out after 1970. Why? Insurance premiums began punishing big block muscle buyers. Emission regulations started choking performance by 1971. Fuel economy fears and rising gas prices were starting to reshape consumer priorities. Ford transitioned to lower compression engines, and the 351 Cleveland gradually took over as the Mustang's top motor. In 1971, Ford still offered a 429 CJ in the Mustang, but it was heavier and less iconic. The Mach 1 soldiered on, but the magic was gone. The 428 SCJ had been built at the peak, and the peak was over. Today, the 1969-70 Mach 1 428 Super Cobra Jet is one of the most coveted Ford muscle cars ever made. Its combination of raw power, aggressive styling, and rarity, especially with 4.30 gears and drag pack, has made it a blue-chip collectible, a fan favorite among Mustang purists, a symbol of what the Mustang could be when Ford wasn't holding back. Only a small number of Mustangs were equipped with the SCJ. Estimates range between 3,000 to 4,000 units across 1969 and 1970, making them genuinely rare, especially with 4-speed manuals and high rear-end gears. Number 5. The 1966 Ford Fairlane 500R Code 427, a rare and almost mythical muscle car that represents Ford's flirtation with turning the drag strip loose on the street, but one they quickly reined in before things got out of hand. In 1966, Ford's Fairlane was not the flashiest muscle car on the market. It was a modest-looking mid-size car, often seen with small-block V8s or even 6 cylinders. A family man's compromise between performance and practicality. But for a fleeting moment in time, Ford dropped a nuclear bomb under its hood. The legendary R-Code 427 V8, the same engine that terrorized NASCAR tracks and NHRA strips. What followed was one of the rarest and most hardcore factory muscle cars Ford ever made. A car built to dominate, not to cruise. It wasn't advertised, it wasn't coddled, and it wasn't meant to stick around. The term R-Code referred to cars equipped with the dual-quad 427 cubic inch FE big block, one of Ford's most potent performance engines. This wasn't just a large engine for show, it was a pure race motor. Bred on the drag strip and in NASCAR R-Code Fairlanes were not ordered by accident. You had to know what you were asking for, and that meant talking to the right dealer, signing off on a non-warranty competition-grade vehicle. Understanding this car was not for the casual driver. This was a short-lived but deliberate effort by Ford to provide serious racers with a lightweight, full-frame car that could be competitive in superstock drag racing. The heart of the Fairlane 500 R-Code was the 427 FEV8, specifically the dual-carb high-riser or medium-riser version, depending on build, tuned for maximum horsepower and top-end speed. Key specs: 427 cubic inches, 7.0 liters, solid lifter cam, dual Holley 4-barrel carburetors on an aluminum intake, rated at 425 horsepower, but in reality made closer to 450 to 475 horsepower, 480-plus pound-feet of torque, forged internals and heavy-duty bearings, 11.5 to 1 compression, required high-octane race fuel, backed by a top-loader 4-speed manual transmission, 9-inch rear axle, often with 4.1 1-to-1 or 4.56 to 1-1 gears. This engine was not street-friendly. It idled rough, overheated in traffic, and had zero interest in anything but full-throttle use. But in the quarter mile, it was absolutely feral. The R-Code 427 Fairlane 500 looked almost like any other Fairlane, and that was the terrifying part. Features: no hood scoop or loud stripes, bench seat interior or optional bucket seats, heavy-duty suspension and reinforced subframes, manual drum brakes or optional front discs, steel wheels with dog-dish hubcaps. It was a sleeper in the purest form, a dragster hidden in Dad's daily driver. The lack of exterior flash only made its performance more shocking. Ford didn't build the R-Code Fairlane for Sunday drives. It was built to win at NHR, a Superstock, HRE Pro Stock. Street drag nights if you were brave and wealthy enough. In capable hands, the R-Code Fairlane could run 0 to 60 miles per hour, approximately 5 seconds. 1/4 mile, low 12 seconds with slicks and minor tuning. Trap speed, 115 plus miles per hour. Serious speed in 1966. Some dealers like Tasca Ford and Bob Ford in Dearborn were known for ordering and prepping these cars for loyal racing customers. Ford quickly realized it had a PR liability on its hands. The R-Code Fairlane was too dangerous for the average buyer. Insurance companies were balking. Ford worried about legal consequences and bad press from street crashes. The car wasn't advertised and Ford made no effort to extend the program. It's estimated that fewer than 60 R-Code Fairlanes were built in 1966, possibly as low as 57 units, making it one of the rarest performance Fords of the decade. By 1967, Ford had moved to the more manageable 390 and 428 Cobra Jet packages for mass-market muscle. Today, the 1966 R-Code Fairlane 500 is a unicorn, rarely seen, barely discussed, and often misunderstood. But in serious muscle car circles, it's recognized as the last factory Ford street car with the 427 race engine, a precursor to the Cobra Jet movement that exploded in 1968, a blue-chip collectible if you can find one. Auction values, if they even surface, exceed $200,000 plus for authentic, documented R-Code cars. Most were wrecked, raced into oblivion, or converted into full drag machines. Survivors are scarce and sacred. Number 4, the 1969 Mercury Cyclone, Spoiler 2, a car built for one purpose, to dominate NASCAR. Yet despite its bold name and aggressive aerodynamics, it was never meant to be remembered on the street. Ford buried it as quickly as it unveiled it. The 1969 Mercury Cyclone Spoiler 2 was not designed with the average car buyer in mind. It wasn't flashy in a muscle car sense, nor was it built to cruise Main Street. It was purpose-built for one mission: win races in NASCAR's high-speed oval battleground. Alongside the Ford Torino Tallaladega, the Cyclone Spoiler 2 was part of Ford's aggressive push in the so-called Aero Wars, a brief but intense era where the Big Three raced the win more than they raced each other. The Cyclone Spoiler 2 was sleek, fast, and nearly invisible to the public. Its life was short, its production numbers low, and its legacy all but buried. Yet its purpose and performance deserve serious recognition. In the late 1960s, NASCAR speeds were climbing, and so were aerodynamic demands. What worked in 1965 wouldn't cut it by 1969. Chrysler had the Dodge Charger 500 and would soon drop the Daytona. Ford responded with the Torino Tallaladega, a smoothed-out fastback designed in a wind tunnel. Mercury, Ford's performance luxury brand, was tasked with building its own homologation special. Enter the Cyclone Spoiler 2. To compete, NASCAR required manufacturers to build at least 500 road-going versions of the race cars they planned to field. Ford and Mercury barely met that requirement, just enough to get their slippery machines on the track. The Cyclone Spoiler 2 was essentially a modified Mercury Cyclone fastback with an extended front nose, about 19 inches longer than the regular Cyclone. A flush-mounted grille, based on a 1968 Ford Fairlane front bumper, flipped upside down for smoother airflow. A more rounded and aerodynamic front profile, eliminating the stepped grille and inset headlights. Smooth fenders, a drop nose, and a fastback roofline for better downforce at speed. Underneath, reinforced chassis components borrowed from Ford's racing program. But this was not a flashy car. Unlike the Plymouth Superbird that would arrive in 1970 with a cartoonish rear wing, the Spoiler 2 was subtle and serious. Its limited color schemes, red, white, or blue combinations, hinted at patriotism more than performance. Here's where things get strange. While the race versions of the Cyclone Spoiler 2 ran 428 Cobra Jet engines, or even Boss 429s, the street versions were underwhelming by comparison. Most production units were equipped with the 351 Windsor 5.8, making around 290 horsepower. A few were fitted with 390 or 428 Cobra Jet engines, but these are exceedingly rare. Transmission choices included 3-speed manuals and C6 automatics. Performance on the street wasn't mind-blowing. 0 to 60 in approximately 7 seconds, with mid-14 seconds in the quarter mile for well-tuned CJ-equipped versions. This wasn't about winning stoplight races. The real action was happening at Talladega, Daytona, and Atlanta, where these cars were engineered to sustain 180+ miles per hour in the hands of pros. Ford and Mercury did just enough to satisfy NASCAR rules. Exact production numbers vary, but estimates suggest 351 units of the Spoiler 2 were built. Of those, many were sold through select dealerships as promotional cars, not even full-featured consumer vehicles. A few were used as track cars, pace cars, or dealer demonstrators. Once homologation was complete, Ford and Mercury pulled the plug. There was no marketing push, no flashy ad campaign, and no real intent to make it a showroom success. It existed solely to satisfy NASCAR's rules. In competition, the Cyclone Spoiler 2 and its twin, the Torino Tallaladega, was successful, if not dominant. Driven by Cale Yarborough and other big-name racers, it helped Ford and Mercury remain competitive in the face of Mopar's rising tide. Its design proved that aerodynamics mattered, setting the stage for the winged warrior era of 1970. However, by the time the Spoiler 2 found its stride, the aero wars were nearly over. NASCAR, fearing rising speeds and technological one-upmanship, tightened rules in 1971, banning many of these specialized cars and requiring absurd production numbers for future homologation. That effectively killed the program. Number 3, the 1972 Ford Gran Torino Sport 351 Cobra Jet. A sleek, aggressive coupe that tried to keep the muscle flame alive, but ultimately marked the twilight of Ford's true performance era. By 1972, the American muscle car was under siege. Emissions regulations, rising insurance premiums, gas prices, and changing consumer tastes had taken a heavy toll. The golden age of street performance was ending, and fast. Enter the 1972 Ford Gran Torino Sport 351 Cobra Jet. It was Ford's attempt to adapt. Muscle still mattered to a segment of buyers, but it had to be wrapped in a more refined, sleeker, and slightly more responsible package. The new Gran Torino Sport looked like a performance car, sounded like one, and even moved like one, but the flame was flickering, not roaring. The 351 Cobra Jet was no slouch, but it signaled a shift. The days of wild 427s and 429s were gone. The Gran Torino Sport was a muscle car in a business suit, handsome and competent, but no longer ferocious. To understand the Gran Torino Sport's place in history, you must understand the moment it was born into. The Clean Air Act and other federal regulations were tightening emissions controls. Car insurance premiums for high-horsepower models had skyrocketed. Manufacturers began advertising net horsepower after drivetrain losses, making numbers look smaller. Muscle cars from every brand were being neutered or discontinued. In this climate, Ford didn't walk away from performance entirely. Instead, it pivoted, wrapping what performance remained in a more sophisticated, Grand Touring-style body, hence the Gran Torino Sport. The 1972 Gran Torino was a radical redesign from the previous year. It introduced Ford's Coke bottle styling with a long, swooping body, pronounced front fenders and a wide-mouth grille, fastback roof lines and sculpted flanks, an optional sport package with unique badging, striping, and trim. It looked like a movie star and would become one. This was the same basic body used in Starsky and Hutch's famous red and white Torino. Compared to boxier earlier models, the 72 looks sleek, modern, and ready to go fast, even if the firepower under the hood had been trimmed. While most 1972 Torinos came with mild 302 or 351 two-barrel engines, the Gran Torino Sport had an ace up its sleeve, the 351 Cobra Jet. Here's what it offered. Engine, 351 Cleveland 5.8 with Cobra Jet heads. Carburetor, 4-barrel. Compression, 0.0. Output, 248 net horsepower, approx. 275 to 280 gross horsepower. Torque, 366 pound-feet. Transmissions, optional top-loader 4-speed or C6 automatic. Optional drag pack with 3.91 or 4.11 rear gears, limited slip, and an external oil cooler. It wasn't the fire-breathing 429 Super Cobra Jet of years past, but the 351 CJ had strong mid-range power, excellent heads, and real capability when optioned correctly. It could do 0 to 60 in around 6.5 to 7 seconds, quicker than most would expect. Still, this was a gentleman's muscle car now, tamed but not yet neutered. Ford worked to make the Gran Torino Sport more than just fast in a straight line. The frame was stiffer, the suspension tuned for handling, and front disc brakes were standard. You could option it with competition suspension with heavy-duty shocks and springs, power steering and power brakes, performance tires on Magnum 500 wheels. It still leaned like a boat in corners by modern standards, but compared to its 1960s ancestors, the Gran Torino Sport was more balanced and easier to live with. Ford gave the Gran Torino Sport an interior that matched its role as a refined muscle cruiser, bucket seats and optional console, full instrumentation with a tachometer, rare for Ford, wood grain trim and padded dash. Available AM/FM stereo with 8-track. This was a far cry from the bare-bones Falcon or Fairlane GT of a few years earlier. It was performance with a veneer of luxury, aimed at grown-ups who didn't want to give up on fun just yet. In 1972, Ford sold nearly 500,000 Torinos, and the Gran Torino Sport was a respectable part of that. But it was clear which way the wind was blowing. Big block engines were quietly disappearing. Net horsepower ratings made cars look weaker than before. Insurance companies penalized anything with Cobra or Jet in the name. By 1973, the Gran Torino Sport was still around, but the 351 CJ was weakened further. By 1974, the focus had shifted to luxury and safety. Performance was no longer the point. Number 2, the 1964 Ford Thunderbolt, a factory-built drag strip weapon disguised as a Fairlane, and one of the most outrageous and legendary muscle cars of its time. In the early 1960s, the battlefields of American automotive performance weren't just found on the street or NASCAR tracks. They were raging down quarter-mile drag strips. Detroit's Big Three were all quietly arming themselves for a different kind of war. Factory-backed drag racing. While GM publicly banned racing support and Chrysler was cranking out HEMIS, Ford went for the nuclear option in 1964. They built the Thunderbolt. Stripped down, brutally powerful, and barely street legal, the 1964 Ford Thunderbolt was a Fairlane in name only. Underneath, it was a surgically focused dragster, built for one purpose: to win NHRA Superstock and embarrass the competition. By 1963, Ford's 427 V8 was making waves in NASCAR, but it hadn't yet proven itself at the drag strip. Competitors like the Chevrolet Z11 Impala, Pontiac Super Duty, and Chrysler's Max Wedge Dodges and Plymouths were dominating drag racing. So Ford's Special Vehicle Operations, SVO, and Ford Experimental Garage, working with race partners like Dearborn Steel Tubing, DST, developed a secret weapon. Take the compact Ford Fairlane, strip every ounce of weight possible, and stuff in the monstrous 427 high-riser V8. The result was the Thunderbolt, a name never officially used in Ford brochures, but seared into drag racing legend. The heart of the Thunderbolt was the 427 cubic inch FEV8, the same race-bred power plant used in NASCAR and Le Mans. Key specs: displacement, 427 cubic inches, 7.0 liters. Carburation, dual Holley 4-barrel carburetors on a high-rise intake. Horsepower, officially rated at 425 horsepower, but closer to 500-plus horsepower. Torque, massive, over 480 pound-feet. Compression ratio, 12.5 to 1. Transmission, heavy-duty 4-speed top-loader or C6 automatic. Rear axle, 9-inch Ford with 4.11 or 4.57 gears, Detroit locker. This was a race engine in a production car shell. No compromises. It could launch the Thunderbolt down the quarter mile in the low 11-second range, making it one of the fastest American production cars ever. Ford pulled no punches when it came to weight savings. Fiberglass hood, fenders, doors, and front bumper, plexiglass side and rear windows, no sun visors, armrests, rear seats, heater, or radio, no sound deadening or insulation. Battery relocated to the trunk for better weight distribution. Total curb weight, just under 3,200 pounds. Featherlight compared to most full-size muscle cars. To further enhance weight transfer on launch, the Thunderbolt featured stiff front suspension and lightweight rear leaf springs, ensuring maximum traction and minimal front-end dive. From a distance, the Thunderbolt looked like a plain Jane 1964 Fairlane, but up close, it was full of clues that this was no grocery getter. A large teardrop fiberglass hood scoop fed the high-rise dual-quad intake, minimal badging, skinny front tires, and fat slicks in back. Hood pins, trunk-mounted battery cutoff switch. It was a sleeper only to the untrained eye. Anyone at the track knew what a Thunderbolt was, stepped back when one rolled into the staging lanes. Ford built the Thunderbolt to dominate NHRA Superstock, and it did. In its debut year, 1964, Thunderbolts won NHRA Superstock national titles. They consistently ran 11.5 seconds or faster at 120-plus miles per hour. In the right hands like Butch Leal, Gas Ronda, Dick Brannon, they became unbeatable at the strip. Ford built just 100 units, the minimum number required for NHRA homologation, and all were sold to select racers and teams, not general customers. About 49 came with 4 speeds, and the rest had automatics. Many were immediately trailered to the drag strip, never seeing public roads at all. The Thunderbolt was never meant to be a mass-produced car. It was a purpose-built factory racer, not a showroom cruiser. But even with its success, Ford knew it was walking a legal tightrope. The cars had rough, idle, poor street manners, and high-octane fuel requirements. Many were barely street legal, if at all. Insurance companies and safety regulators were starting to take notice. Ford was beginning to wind down direct racing involvement, in part due to mounting public scrutiny. So after those 100 cars, Ford canceled the Thunderbolt program, never to be repeated in the same form again. Number 1, the 1970 Mercury Cyclone spoiler, 429 Super Cobra Jet, a wild, underrated machine from the golden age of muscle that came out swinging but disappeared into obscurity. By 1970, the American muscle car market was crowded. Chevrolet had the Chevelle SS 454, Pontiac had the GTO Judge, Dodge had the Charger RT, and Plymouth had the Roadrunner and GTX. But one car came from a brand not known for raw aggression, Mercury. That car was the 1970 Mercury Cyclone spoiler, 429 Super Cobra Jet. Mercury had always been Ford's upscale division, sitting somewhere between the modest Ford lineup and the luxury of Lincoln. But in a rare moment of rebellion, Mercury went full muscle, creating one of the most potent and underrated muscle cars of the era. The result? A big, bold, brutally fast machine that didn't sell, wasn't understood, and has mostly been forgotten. Despite having one of the most powerful engines of its generation, the Mercury Cyclone started life in the mid-1960s as a performance trim on the Comet, aimed at sporty drivers who didn't want a plain Ford Fairlane or Mustang. It was Mercury's shot at injecting performance into its rather buttoned-up image. By 1970, Mercury was trying to appeal to younger buyers, and that meant creating a true muscle car. Something bold enough to stand with the Mopar and GM titans of the street. So the Cyclone became its own model, and the spoiler version was its muscle-bound top-tier variant. This was Mercury's way of going all in, and Ford gave it the tools to do the job. The heart of the Cyclone spoiler was the 429 cubic inch Super Cobra Jet V8, one of the most brutal power plants ever dropped into a production, Ford or Mercury. Specifications: displacement, 429 cubic inches, 7.0 liters. Horsepower, 375 horsepower. Gross rating, actually underrated. Torque, 450 pound-feet. Carburation, Holley, 780 cubic feet per minute 4-barrel. Compression ratio, 11.3 to 1. Transmission, close ratio 4-speed manual or C6 automatic. Rear axle, 3.91 or 4.30. Traction lock with external oil cooler. Drag pack. The Super Cobra Jet was no mild-mannered street engine. It came with solid lifters, forged pistons, a heavy-duty crankshaft, and big port cylinder heads. Paired with the optional drag pack, it was a race-bred motor built to survive high RPM abuse. This engine made the Cyclone spoiler a 13-second quarter-mile car, bone stock. In the world of 1970, that was elite territory. The Cyclone spoiler wore its performance heritage loudly. Dual racing stripes that ran over the hood and deck lid. A unique front fascia with an aerodynamic nose cone, mimicking Ford's NASCAR efforts. Hood scoop, body-colored bumpers, and spoilers, Magnum 500 wheels and fat tires. Inside, however, things were a little more subdued. The Cyclone's cabin still carried Mercury's upscale DNA, with wood grain trim, full instrumentation, and optional high-back bucket seats. It was a muscle car that tried to act like a gentleman, but nobody was fooled. Under all the polish was a street brawler. With the 429 SCJ under the hood, the Cyclone spoiler was loud, hard-edged, and aggressive. It wasn't a finesse car. It was a torque monster. The clutch was heavy, the power delivery violent, and the gearing tight. It demanded attention and respect. The combination of the drag pack, rear oil cooler, and 3.91/4.30 gears made it clear. This car wasn't built for leisurely cruises. It was built to win on the street and at the track. Yet despite this ferocity, Mercury's identity crisis meant it wasn't marketed clearly. Was it a luxury muscle car? A NASCAR tribute? A high-speed Grand Tourer? Even buyers didn't quite know. And that hurt sales. Mercury never made many of these. Out of all 1,970 Cyclone spoilers produced, only about 1,631 units were built total. Far fewer had the full 429 SCJ plus drag pack combo. Only a tiny fraction came with the 4-speed manual. This makes the Cyclone spoiler SCJ one of the rarest big block muscle cars of its time. It was the right car at the wrong time from the wrong brand, and that sealed its fate. The Cyclone spoiler SCJ suffered from multiple problems. Mercury wasn't seen as a muscle car brand, so performance buyers skipped it. Insurance premiums on big block muscle cars were skyrocketing in 1970. Emissions laws were tightening and gas prices were climbing. The public was confused by a Mercury that tried to act like a Plymouth Superbird,